came back here to do my presentation, so because it's quiet and I have a setup. So I'm back here for that.
Mhm. And Lisa, you're muted.
Do my presentation, so because it's quiet and I have a setup.
Oh,
So I'm back here.
oh, is
I
that the
heard
live
myself.
stream?
Yep, sorry, I was in the midst of
Gotcha.
setting
Well,
up.
since you have the live stream set up on this Zoom, did you let Jade know that the live stream is available? Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, very cool.
So Barb, we have this situation where one of our members in the program is not allowed to be in a meeting that's being recorded if it's not a public meeting.
Mhm.
Interesting.
She works for the state library, and I think there's just a lot of concerns around like the political environment right now. So we were like, okay, how can we do this? So
Oh.
what we figured out is that I can actually set it up to stream to YouTube just temporarily, right? So she comes when we're not recording, and then when we start recording, she jumps over to the live stream. Then when
Oh,
small groups,
okay.
she comes back to this
Which state library does she work at? I might know her.
the Illinois.
Illinois. Oh,
Jade,
yeah, that would make sense that it's Illinois.
yeah,
Do I know
Jade
if
Pastel. She
No,
just
not
started
familiar.
working there this year, so
Oh, okay. That's probably why. Yeah. That's interesting. I don't
I think it's a dumb rule, but
That is weird. I don't have that rule. At least I'm not aware of
Mm.
that.
No, I'm sure you don't. I mean, this is the only time I've heard of this, and I feel very personally, I feel very much like it's one of these like overkill responses.
Yeah, I mean, we're having some issues with the funding, obviously at the federal level. Michigan is having issues at the state level as well.
Mhm.
I don't know if you guys have heard any news on us, but um, oh,
Mhm.
they just put me on. I
Yes,
was like, where'd you all go?
Oh.
Um,
Mhm.
I'm just setting this up to like spotlight,
oh,
so
perfect.
want to make sure I
Yeah,
remembered how it worked.
but our house, like, so our house and our Senate are one party and another party, and they will not concede on the
Mm.
budget. But the budget, um, one side wants to gut it and lay off 20%
Mhm.
of the people at the state level and cut 20% of the budget for each agency. And so then that would cut even more people. And cutting 20% and my office of staff, we would not be able to run. We do not have enough staff we
Mhm.
barely have enough staff now. So the
Mhm.
library would essentially close. So we were like, yeah, I hope that budget doesn't go through because then the library's closing.
So
That is
stressful
so
and
stressful.
Yeah, people don't think that's the case. A lot of them, I was talking to my coworker, she's like, I think they just see it as money and they don't understand what the money is used for and like the daily functions that you need, and you need bodies to run a library. Like,
Hmm.
so they just don't think of things like that, especially us, because we're open to the public. We need a certain amount of people to be there to run. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's what's been going on. And then the Senate's budget is much more reasonable, but yeah, I think they're fighting their main fight is the staff cuts and the roads. They want to cut the road funding, so it's been
That's
going
so,
on.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
so frustrating.
Yeah, and just leaves everybody in a state of like no one can be comfortable and know what's gonna happen because everything is up in the air so much.
Hmm.
That
Yeah,
feels
Yeah,
like part of it.
yeah, I
I
was talking to
don't
some
sorry,
publishers.
go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was talking to some publishers and platforms at the peer review congress. They're like, well,
Hmm.
what, and I was like, this is worse than budget cuts. Like with budget cuts, it was like, all right, 6%, like you can like horrible, right? Like when we've taken that kind of budget cut, but like you could just do it and you can like adjust. But right now it's just like, well, maybe or not, or could
Hmm.
be.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I think, far more debilitating.
Yeah. I just don't think they realize that, like, the budget we run is pretty shoestring, and so then if
Mhm.
they take 20% away plus 20% of staff, we just not
Yeah.
we're gonna be able to buy books.
Hmm.
And we're a library, so
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's literally what my boss said. He's like, I don't think this is going to go through because it's unreasonable. But if it went through, we couldn't buy books and we're a library. So
Hmm.
yeah, things like that.
Hmm.
Hmm.
But I think it'll be fine. Nobody seems like too worried. They just think it's all a bunch of political posturing.
Okay. But
So
this may not be where it settles. This is where they're starting things to then leverage some negotiations out of stuff.
yeah, and they want us to come back full time to the office, but it doesn't make sense. They sold a bunch of their buildings. So there's
Hmm.
not enough space for us
Okay.
to come back.
Hmm.
Oh,
So
where to
that's why they want to
go?
cut 20% of the staff so they can come back.
Right.
Uh, First,
Um,
like, yeah, it's so weird with like the you must come back mandates that places have when like all of the library people that I know who do work remote, like they're just as efficient. Like they're as efficient working remote as they were when they were
Mhm.
in space because they are in positions that do well remote.
yeah, I do
Hmm.
better remote because you get asked to you just don't get enough done during the
Hmm.
day. You end up in like a million meetings and doing other things versus like your actual core work you need to do. So when
Yep.
you're at home, nobody can really be like, "Oh, help
Well,
me do
grabs
this"
you.
or what.
Yes, and no place open to the public. Like when I worked in a library, it was like I was in a room that was close to the circ desk. So it's like whenever anybody needed someone, they would just pop their head in the door and there was me. So it was like getting pulled in to like help with the printer, do this thing, whatever it was,
Yep.
which wasn't any of the stuff that I needed to get done.
Yep. So that I mean,
Hmm.
and I can do my job completely, but they have us hybrid, so I go in
Hmm.
twice a week. The whole
Hmm.
state's hybrid, so I'm confused why they want us in 5 days. And the reason it's hybrid is so people can share desks and they're not in at the same
Yeah.
time. And
Mhm.
so I
That's,
don't really know what they're thinking, but
yeah, that seems like that is balanced well then for the amount of space that they kept for you all and the number of staff that there are, that you've got it all time shared really well. They're like,
yeah,
let's mess that up.
yeah.
Not your library people, but the people making these rules.
So for us, we didn't lose any space because the library, they're not going to sell the library. So, but
Hmm.
other entities, they lost their entire building.
Okay.
So they don't even have, like other agencies, like we don't even have anywhere to go. So I don't
Mhm.
really know what their plan is for that, for those people. Um,
Yeah.
I did see that they wanted the people who work for data, doing the data stuff for the Department of Education, um, they made their office so their cubes were so small so they could fit all of them in there. It was crazy. I was like, I would not. I would be claustrophobic in there.
Oh, so they just have like tiny little desk
Yeah.
spaces that just like the monitor fits on and that's it.
Yep.
Okay, like
Yep.
call center life.
Yes, like call center style. Like it is very, very small.
Okay, that
So,
works well with productivity when you can hear every conversation that is happening in the exact vicinity of you.
yeah, but they
Oh.
don't even, yeah, so we'll see how this all goes down. But yeah. So that's where we're at here.
Hmm.
So I'm not surprised they're doing all that kind of stuff. Um,
Hmm.
for them. There's all this weird rules going around right now at state levels just because of like federal funding. They're threatening to cut so much.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Maybe they're just trying to cover their backs.
Hmm.
And the DEI stuff is a huge thing. Like they pulled funding from Washington over it. So
Hmm.
crazy stuff.
Hello, everyone. If you've
Hi,
been
everybody.
room, I apologize that I did not notice until just now.
I think, Lisa, as the host of the meeting, you're the only one who sees the admit button.
Yep, I think so. So I just failed.
Do you want to make me a co-host so that I can start the recording, or do you want to
You
do
are the
that?
co-host.
Am I? Okay.
Yep. Oh, no, you're not anymore.
Yeah,
Okay. Yes, I will make you the co-host.
thank you.
You were a co-host, but
Zoom does what it wants sometimes. I think it's one
yeah,
of those things like when you entered the meeting, it's like, do you want to be the host? And then it didn't co-host me.
yeah,
Zoom
you're
does what
right.
it wants.
Yeah.
Yeah, so often.
Hmm. Yep.
Hey everyone. Oh, I like that background, Sarah. Although, is that from some like emoji game thing? Yes, there's a little character behind you.
No, it's just an artist. She
Oh,
draws
okay.
these little bunnies, but
Oh, okay.
I just like to be seasonal with my backgrounds.
Yes, it's very cute.
Thank you.
There we go.
That is really cute.
Wait, did I do the right? Yes, I did. Okay, perfect. Get it all set up before we start here.
Sure.
Mhm. And I have Barbara's introduction
Oh,
that
good.
that do you want me to call you Barb or Barbara? I just noticed your name in Zoom.
Barb's fine.
Okay.
It's great. I just have one or two quick announcements before we turn it over to the purpose of today.
Awesome. So do you want me to start the recording right at 9 then, and then you'll do those announcements and
Yep.
then, okay,
Yep, that'll be great.
awesome. Your little chalk characters are really cute.
Yeah, they were fun to make.
Did you draw them with like the little like I'm just thinking in paint how there's all those different little marker pieces and you like did you draw them or how did you create them?
So there were like templates for them and then you put them together and then you can like change the design up and the faces and the legs and so I did that. But other stuff I drew on here as well. So they're like templates that you can like kind of craft and make
That
your
sounds like
own.
a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was.
So the shapes could have like different expressions. Like these ones are like excited and happy, but there could be like, ah, shucks kind of
Yeah,
little
there are
shapes.
some you'll
Okay.
see.
Okay. The little noodle arms are very satisfying.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, Jade is watching on the live stream. Hi, Jade. So that's good. I still am like really reveling in my technology idea that worked out there and like um
Yeah,
though
that worked really well.
clearly it's not 100% solution, so there must be something different in how the University of Illinois Urbana lets me run my Zoom versus how the University of Illinois system lets Debbie and Ann run their Zoom.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, thank you for trying to help Anne get that set up because she and I had tried and it just wouldn't do it. It was just like, nope,
nope, no.
do these permissions. Okay, set.
Yeah.
Do these other permissions. Okay, set. And then it was still like, nope, no
Yep.
permissions. It was
Yep.
like, oh no.
Yeah. Every year in CARLI Counts, we learn something new.
It's very true.
Yes. Max, are you outside? Oh, that's just the design.
Are those beautiful windows?
Yeah, it's the windows, but I have the blinds halfway down, so
Oh, the blinds are down. They were
y'all can
reading
see the
as
screen.
like umbrellas, like on a like you were sitting on a table that had umbrellas in the back.
Yeah, if they were up, I just wouldn't be able to see the screen at all.
Oh, okay. As most libraries are so well designed. Okay, Debbie, I think we should go ahead and start the recording and get ourselves going here today.
I was just noticing the option is record to the cloud is what I always pick, but it's forcing me to choose smart recording with the AI companion enabled.
Whoa.
I don't want that.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can just do it.
So if you do record to the cloud, does it let you do it without the AI companion since it's
Nope.
okay, we'll have to look how to turn that off later then.
Yep.
Okay. I guess go ahead and record to the cloud and we'll figure out how to turn off AI later.
Yes. I linked to the Mediascape one, so it's really it's the one that gets pushed over to MediaSpace, so this one will just get deleted.
Okay. Do you want me to push the button then or will you?
Please, I'm leaving you in
Okay.
charge of recording.
Okay.
It can only be a team effort. Want to be part of the team. No. Okay, good morning and welcome everyone. We are in for a very big treat today. And we will get going with that just shortly, but I just want to remind you of a couple upcoming things. First, October 1, the deadline for your team posters to be submitted to Michelle and myself. So you've still got 3 weeks. You're not late yet, but just want to make sure that's on your radar. And then, of course, we're looking forward to seeing all of you in Champaign-Urbana for the CARLI annual meeting on October 21st. And if you have not yet registered for that, please make sure you do register so that we can get a good catering count, etc. As a reminder, it's a very low-key day. As far as your poster, you just stand by it and talk about your experience in CARLI Counts. And then, of course, you have the opportunity to enjoy the rest of the annual meeting. And I personally am looking very much forward to our keynote speaker, Scott Carlson, who is a writer for the Chronicle of Higher Education, who covers a lot about academic libraries and is a big supporter of us. So thank you, Evie, for being our Zoom jockey. I'll get that figured out. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie and our great guest speaker today.
Thank you. I've got the pleasure of introducing Barb. Barb Williams currently serves as a data analyst for the Library of Michigan. She brings a unique blend of skills to her work, having earned her degree in art and design in 2010, followed by her master's in information and library science in 2019 from the University of Washington. With over 13 years of experience working in various libraries and as a freelance artist, Barb possesses valuable insights into both design and data, and we're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you. I have done this presentation many times for you guys and I love doing it. So thank you guys for inviting me back. Let me start my slideshow. So hi, everybody. I'm Barb. I'm a data analyst for Library of Michigan. So I was invited here because I use data visualization a lot at my job, especially this year. I have stories. Specifically, we have a lot of stuff that we needed to tell the state legislature what we were using our funding for. So I made a lot of visualizations this year. Um, I have experience in both design and data, which is something I notice when I deal with certain groups of people. It's easier if the design is better, easier for them to understand. So it kind of puts me in a unique position in my field. And I actually still do work as a freelance illustrator and graphic designer. I actually pivoted recently to landscape painting just because I wanted a nice calming art activity. But I've actually worked in libraries for 13 years, almost 14 years at this point. I started actually at the bottom rung in a public library doing circulation, and I have moved my way up and got my master's over that time. And that's when I kind of liked the aspect of data analytics because there was a lot of design that I liked from my undergrad degree, which was in art and design. So I actually am going to start with a poll here, but I'm going to do the little hands up because I don't really like Zoom polls very much, like how the functionality of it. So raise your hand if you have a lot of experience with doing data visualizations. I'm just curious if we have anybody here. Okay, we have a few. I always like to ask this because when I give this presentation, I never know what I'm walking into. Specifically, I've had people who have experience with data analytics, but not a lot of experience with art and design. And then I've done this for people in marketing who have a lot of experience with design and not a lot in analytics. So I always like to get an idea of what the group is. So today we're going to cover what data visualization is, which is just the graphical representation of information and data. So this is going to be something that everybody's kind of familiar with. This is our visual elements like charts, graphs. We've seen maps. Um, they provide an accessible way for us to see trends, outliers, and then patterns in our data. And this is something that more and more I'm looking for in my job is patterns of usage for certain things in the library. So today we're going to actually discuss three main topics. Um, we're going to choose the best chart or visualization for your data. We're going to look at the best practices for those specific charts and graphs. And we're not going to cover all of them because there's so many, but we're going to cover some of the more popular ones, the kind of the ones that are easier. Like I don't cover maps or anything like that. Um, and then we're going to talk about how this will improve your message with your stakeholders or your audience. We'll also be discussing asking yourself questions about your data so you can choose the best visualization and use this to your advantage when you are presenting this to a stakeholder um, or an audience of some sort. And then I also talk about design in my presentation a lot because I actually created this after I started seeing so many people do these presentations with all this data they collected, all this research they collected, and it was just hard to read and not very visually appealing. And I thought, you know what, I should make a presentation specifically talking about this, and that'll help them out. It's just helping them explain their data to their audience. And it also kind of lacks messaging and overall readability when we don't use strong design. So this is another reason why I created this. There's other things that I have sprinkled in here because these are questions that I get throughout this presentation, which is accessibility, which is something at the state level that we're a little bit more focused on. And then also I get questions about data ethics with visualization as well. I only briefly cover these. These are topics that you could specifically do a whole presentation on, but I just wanted to cover them because these are questions that I do get. Um, and then last thing I'm going to discuss is actually the range of visualization programs and software. And I'm going to discuss beginner choices, and then I'll discuss a little bit of what's out there from there. When I first created this presentation, there wasn't as much talk about AI and data visualization, and now there's a lot more that AI can do. AI is not always correct with the data, and also there's some other things too as well. Like if you input data that has personal information on it, that's not something you want to do, things of that nature. Um, I don't really get into AI in this presentation. It's something that I was thinking about. I'm like, should I discuss it? Because there is data visualization with AI, and I'm seeing that more and more. But I'd have to investigate that more, honestly, if I wanted to include this. But oh, I saw, yes. Yes, go Huskies. Sorry, my chat is way over here, so every once in a while I'm going to look over. Go ahead and write your questions. I'm going to answer them midway through, and then I'm going to answer them at the end as well. So go ahead and write them, and then I will wait until I get about halfway through this presentation right before our break, and then I will at the end also answer your questions as well. And so I'm hoping to have at least 15 minutes at the end, but I wanted to break it up a little bit because when I've done this before, with it being so long, I feel like there is this moment where people are like, I forgot the first half of the presentation. So I'm going to try to answer those halfway, and then I'll also answer them at the end as well. So I like to start with a quote by Florence Nightingale. She was a groundbreaking medical professional and statistician. And I always kind of forget that about her because she has such a lore around her. But she was one of the first data visualizations, the creating visualizations out there. She wasn't the first, but she was working with a group of statisticians, and she was one of the first ones to create um, these beautiful like pie charts that she was able to convince public opinion and change the idea of modern sanitation practices. So at this time period, talking about in hospitals or in the field, talking about changing the way we do medicine. And she made these because she realized she needed to speak to not only the scholars and medical professionals, she needed to speak to lawmakers, which is something I do at our job, and the general public, which is also something I do at my job. So this is why data visualization has caught on and is so important, because it's a really powerful tool that we can communicate some scientific ideas at a level that some people who might not have experience in that field could understand. If you want to learn more about this podcast, I actually listened to it on 99% Invisible. It's episode 433, Florence Nightingale, Data Viz Pioneer. I love 99% Invisible, although I have to say, yes, yeah, I'm a big fan. I haven't listened to it in a while because I've been listening to audiobooks, but I need to get back into it. So I would highly recommend listening to it. I learned a lot about the history of data visualization. So we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to just talk about graphs, charts, diagrams, and you're going to be pretty familiar with a lot of these. Some of them you might not be, but I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about them. Maybe you haven't heard before. And then we're going to talk about best practices with these and design choices that can make it easier for your audience, and it'll prevent confusion. I just put a bunch of them on here. I'm not going to go through all of these. It's way too much, but these are some of the types of charts that you can use in your visualizations that are available in some of the softwares or on Excel. Um, you probably recognize many of these. For the ones that you don't, you've definitely seen them, but we have for example, I talk about area charts. When I show you that, you might not recognize the name, but when I show you what it looks like, you're going to be like, oh, I've seen this before. We have the basics here. We have a bar chart, a column, and a line chart. I will talk about area charts, which are some of my favorite because you can make them quite beautiful. We have bullet charts, and all of these can make a really strong visual case for your data. It just kind of depends on what's best for you. I included word clouds in here because I get some questions about quantitative data. I've actually pivoted to doing sentiment analysis on survey questions. So looking at the positive, neutral, and negative comments, and then mapping it from there to quantify it a little bit. But word clouds are a way to kind of get a gist of what people are saying in your comments. I wouldn't necessarily say word clouds are like the most scientific, but it does give you an overall look at what you're asking. I do not include maps. So I could do a whole presentation on maps. They're wonderful to use. A lot of it with maps, they use different types of software like ArcGIS, or I've used Photoshop as well with maps. I sometimes use them with Power BI. So I just don't cover them because I would spend like an hour talking about them and I want to cover everything. So, but those are also a wonderful way, especially if you have geographical data. I use it to map libraries around the state, and so I can kind of see what regions are doing what, but it kind of just depends on what your data is. And also, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to email me. I've been doing this for a while, and I've kind of seen a lot of different questions with visualizations, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. My email will be at the end. I think it was at the beginning too, but yes, it'll be at the end as well. So I'm actually going to start with the one that people are probably the most familiar with. I'm going to give a little bit of information here, and then I'm going to show you an example. So we're going to start with a little bit about our design practices here. But a column chart is used to show comparison between different items, or it can show a comparison of items over time. So column and bar charts kind of follow this same vein. They're using categorical data and they're putting them into discrete groups. So these discrete groups can be like age, they can be like year, Sometimes people group things by gender, sometimes it's by animals. I've seen one like that as well. Um, if there's not a reason to group them a certain way, the best way for visual appeal with column charts is actually from highest to lowest. It's the easiest for us to read. Um, the bottom of the slides, so I actually have best design practices on here. So I will be sharing these slides later. So when we go back through, I just wrote them down on the slide. So everything that I talk about here, you can actually refer back to. So some of the best design practices I want to cover are accent colors. I talk about colors a lot throughout this um, presentation, and I'll talk about when you don't have access, because I've done this with public libraries. They're like, I can't print in color or something like that. So I do talk about that a little bit as well. But I like to talk about color because this is something I see a lot. Um, Using bright colors and it kind of skews readability. You can use bright colors, but you kind of want to use accent colors. So these brighter, like a bright red versus everything's kind of more dull to emphasize certain areas of your visualization. And that makes it easier for people to read it. Um, Another thing is labeling. And I put this on here because it's just incredibly important. And I saw a presentation a few years ago that I just could not read the labels. So if you're trying to um, you know, have a visualization and you want to explain this complicated data to somebody, if they can't read your labels, they're just not going to be able to understand. So that's extremely important. Um, and just kind of the way that it was presented, it was like vertical. I couldn't read it. It was very hard to read. The font was very hard to read. Um, and then the other thing I also talk about here is starting your y-axis with 0. This might seem like a no-brainer, but it is used often that people don't start at 0. They use it as a way to manipulate what they're saying with their data. So it's always a best practice to start with 0 so people can see and where our brain makes a comparison with. So here's an example of a quick column chart that I have made. This particular chart focuses on summer reading and the types of libraries. So actually this is straight from a survey that I do all through for the entire country, which is looking at summer reading data, but specifically with CSLP or collaborative summer reading. And we pull a lot of data, and this is some of the demographic data that we get from that. Um, we can instantly see here, I've labeled it, it's very easy to read. I'm using colors to my advantage here, and it starts with 0. And so if I gave this to somebody, they'd be able to see, oh, the rural community has this many people who say they completed summer reading, and then suburban and urban. Oh, the other thing I wanted to refer to too is also labeling it at the top as well. So having a title to it is important and readable. Once again, I have seen that as well, where I'm not sure what I'm looking at here. It has not been labeled. The next thing I'm going to talk about are bar charts, and I always have this one follow column charts because they're very, very similar. But one advantage that bar chart has over column charts is that column charts, after a certain amount of categories, it's very hard to read. It gets really long. Bar charts can have up to like 10 categories and it's still pretty readable. And that's just because that's the way our eye focuses on things. And it's important to note that having a lot of categories will overwhelm your viewer. So usually less is more with a lot of these visualizations. We also read naturally left to right as well. So going horizontal versus vertical. Um, You'll also notice that the basic design principles from the bar chart here, like, are also from the column chart. So we have coloring practices, labeling is important, and starting your y-axis with 0. So it follows a very similar design practice that we see in column charts. Bar charts and column charts are a bit more forgiving in their design, which is why that data visualization software will actually default you mostly to these because it has like this white space around it and it's pretty easy to read overall. But you don't always have to use the default, but bar charts and column charts are just often what we default to. There's also a different type of bar chart called a infographic chart, which has basically small symbols or infographics that you can use to show parts of a whole. So for example, I've used it in social media usage in some of our social media outlets that we do for Library of Michigan. And so like I have a little people icon. And I love those. They're very visually appealing. But they can be confusing if you have too many little people and people will be like, what am I looking at here? But those are also something you can use as well to make your overall presentation visually appealing. So this is an example of a stacked bar chart, similar to a stacked column chart. The same principle applies here. Stacked charts allow us to compare parts of a whole. So for example, we're looking at homicide rates. This is specifically looking at gun related. And if we look at the United States, it's comparing all of this with a stacked chart. So it's comparing countries, but then it's also comparing each country within itself with a specific topic. So this is something that you can use as well. I also decided to highlight it with a purple color, so to emphasize this is specifically what this visualization is about. And this way we can compare countries and then also compare within that country. This one I actually don't use as often, but line charts really shine when they show trends of progress over time. They also have the ability to compare many different, I'm really sorry, I'm getting 1 second. I'm getting a call. My water went out at my house, and I think they're calling me to say they can come in right now, which is crazy because I'm giving a presentation at the moment. But bad timing. Anyway, so line charts basically are chronological. They display exact values while showing patterns in data. They're often used to show table data. So this is when we're comparing two sets of values. So line charts are very simple visualizations that have a powerful impact when it comes to your design choices. With this, I often use solid lines. You can use dotted lines, but usually that correlates to projection data or hypothetical data. So keep that in mind when creating a line chart. Less is more also. This is what I'm going to say a lot in this presentation. Less is more. Basically, if you have more than 4 lines in your line chart, it becomes very visually confusing. I have seen more, but like I said, it's hard to read for your viewer. It also helps if your line chart takes up most of the space, so there's more of a zoomed in effect, but you still want to start at 0. So I have a very simple line chart. It's kind of hard to jazz up line charts, but you can see that I've made this line chart here. It's talking about progress of speed over time. It's very clearly, we gain an instant knowledge here of what this chart is trying to portray. We see that speed increases over time, and we can make conclusions about this without very much reading. So this is very readable. It's a little boring, but also when it comes to some of our visualizations, we have to think about accessibility as well, which is something that I have to focus in on my job. So sometimes having a white background is something that's required of us. Something I do see though with some visualizations is that they actually have a black background and a white line, and it actually is more easy to read. It's more visually appealing as well. And it can actually make it look a little bit more professional versus a white background, which can look unfinished sometimes. So it's a little pro tip there from the design community. Um, but then less is more always with line charts. I have seen line charts that have a ton of lines, and it's just too hard to read. So just keep that in mind when you're creating these visualizations. So this is one of my favorites, which are area charts. You're probably less familiar with these, but I'm going to show you an example, and then you've probably seen these in popular media because they're a little bit more modern. They're similar to a line chart. They're used to compare parts of a whole. So the name derives from the fact that you fill in the area between the axis and where the line is with color. I've also seen it filled with a pattern or a texture. This is used to show the overall and individual trends at the same time. I've seen a lot of memorable area charts. So one in particular that I liked was one that talks about the rise and fall of how we listen to music over the decades. And this particular chart wanted to show that vinyl records were up and then down, and they had actually risen into our modern era versus CDs, which were very popular in the 90s and the early aughts and then went down. And it had a very modern feel. It created this really beautiful way of showing each individual way that we listen to music and the rise and fall over time since like the 50s. Um, has similar design choices to a line chart, but it's important to note that you use transparent color usually with area charts. So I'll show you what I mean in our example on the next slide. And less is more here. So if you're adding a lot of categories, it's going to be hard to read. So keep that in mind. And it can be confusing and there's just too much information for everyone. And then high variable data goes on top. You're going to see what I'm talking about. Usually that's the data visualization software will do that for you, but it's good to note that is a rule with area charts. So when looking at this chart, we can see the comparison of number of nuclear weapons compared with Russia, USSR, and the US. Some of these that I'm pulling are from Wikipedia, which is interesting, like data that I've gotten from Wikipedia. And some of these are my own data. This one obviously is not about libraries, but here it's important to note because you can make a quick comparison and you can see the overall trend between each country and then the overall trend overall and what year this was occurring. Next, we're going to get into actually the most controversial in the data viz community, which is pie charts. And the reason that they're confusing is, well, actually, let's talk a little bit about what they are, which is that they are parts of a whole with each segment adding up to 100%. So we're looking at parts of a whole pie, right? And the reason that it's considered controversial is they claim that they're hard to read, which is true. They can be hard to read. If you have too many slices of the pie, it gets when some of the data viz software will not even show those smaller segments. Um, and then it also just is hard to read because they're not exact numbers usually in a way, or there are exact numbers, but it just kind of shows a pie. So it's kind of like hard to determine what slice of that pie, like, is it bigger, especially when the slices kind of look the same. So that's kind of why the data viz community is not really, because they find them not as readable. I like them from a design standpoint because circles are just more visually appealing, especially when we think about logos and things like that. A circle logo is always a very nice way it's just like more visually appealing overall when we look at it. So when I just kind of stick to the fact that I just don't want as many slices of the pie. So if I only have a few things, and especially if there's huge numbers in between, so like if they're all very similar in number, it's not going to be as interesting to do a pie chart. But for example, I looked at usage of our databases between academic, public, and school libraries. And I saw an overwhelming amount with academic libraries using our databases. And so pie charts are great for that because it's going to show a very dramatic usage, right? And I only have 3 categories. So this is actually one I made in Canva, and I leave this up because it's interesting to me that it chose these colors and chose it this way to arrange it. So I use it as an example of how sometimes it can be visually confusing. Um, I I would probably recommend not as bright of colors unless it's something you're doing research about the circus or something of that nature that has that correlation, then maybe. But also, some of the slices are very similar, and this is an example of what it kind of looks like when the slices are similar. It's a little harder to read. They are clearly labeled though, which is important. Um, And then also there's another variation on the pie chart, which is a donut chart, which I really like. They're a little bit more modern. It's just basically a hole in the middle. And I see these a lot more uh, in the data viz community now than pie charts, because pie charts just take up a large amount of space. And donut chart actually like gives a little bit of breathing room, makes it a little bit more visually appealing. So I put scatter plots in here. This is a lot more scientific data. I don't use these as much, but it depends on what your research is. So I always leave these in here because they show some very interesting visualizations with scatter plots. Um, they measure relationships between two variables. So, and they can reveal distribution trends. So the specific one that I show on this is going to be talking about Old Faithful, and it's talking about eruptions and times between eruptions. Um, Sometimes this is in conjunction with a continuous variable and is independent. So when plotting this data, with a dependent and an independent variable. The dependent variable is going to be along the vertical axis and the independent will be on the horizontal. If there's no dependent variable, you don't really need to arrange axes. You can choose. Um, it has a lot of similarities to line charts. A lot of times you're going to see a linear correlation or a best fit linear regression with this plot. And this is sometimes what I use for the dotted line for. Um, it's got a lot of similar design practices to line charts. So starting your axis is 0 and making sure that um, you don't have a lot of trend lines. It can be visually confusing. I'm going to actually show you an example here. This is actually one of my favorite ones specifically, although I wouldn't say it's the most visually interesting, is that I really just like the data that's involved with this and how easy it is to read. So here we're able to read that there's an eruption duration with Old Faithful, and it's in comparison to the waiting time in between them. So from this chart, we kind of get an idea that the longer the eruption, the longer the wait time in between the eruption. So I just love how simple this is, but also how I understand the data. And I also kind of just love this data in particular. Next, we're going to talk about waterfall charts. So it sounds like I just keep going on and on with different charts. I promise you we're actually close to being done with the amount of charts I'm going to go over today, just because it's just so much information. But I wanted to cover waterfall charts. This is something that I use because it talks about positive and negative effects adding up to a whole. Sometimes it's organized by time, but it can be organized by category. And it also category can be gains and losses. Specifically, you can use this for budgeting. This is something that I use for budgeting. Design practices for this visualization are pretty important. So it's good to remember that how we read color is important on these waterfall charts, especially if you're doing this with gains and losses, profit gains and losses. So for example, I've seen a waterfall chart that use red as gains, but usually we correlate green as gains. This is kind of the same way with accounting, and red is loss. So think about those color correlations in our visualizations. So that was just something that I saw a lot with a lot of like newer analysts just choosing whatever color. Remember that we do make correlation with color. And when somebody's reading your visualization, it can be visually confusing to the viewer if we switch that up. And it's also, now keep in mind that warm colors and cool colors also have different meanings as well. So, and red and green have different meanings in our culture. It's also good to note that if you're presenting this to maybe a different culture, red and green or colors might actually have a different correlation to them. So it's always good to do research on that. And so waterfall charts are great when you use color to your advantage. And one of the recent ones that I saw was a waterfall chart that was looking at specifically the EU and talking about the Ukrainian war and what countries view the EU favorably right now and which ones don't. And it used color basically saying blue was agreeable and red was disagreeable, like they did not like the EU versus they liked the EU. And a lot of this was impacted by the Russian-Ukrainian war. So they specifically were using design to their advantage and using color coding to express how these countries viewed the EU. Waterfall chart, this one uses the red-green relationship, so that kind of accounting relationship that we see to show company profit and loss. And you may know that, look and see that I have different versions and different like designs on here. So some of these are made in Excel and some of these are made in Canva because I wanted to show you what they kind of look like between the two different programs as we're going through. So this one was actually made in Excel. But this is a great way to quickly see the positive and negative values that will lead to the total profit for this particular company. So the bullet graph is primarily used as a progress towards a goal. You'll see these sometimes in popular media or in your own offices. Sometimes it's shown as a thermometer or a progress bar or a gauge. And I always use this. I need a more modern, I guess, example. But if you guys remember Parks and Rec, they were trying to earn money. This is in the beginning seasons. They were trying to earn money for this park. They had a bullet graph in there, which was a thermometer, which was showing their profit. So that's actually a bullet chart right in on that show. So every time I think about that, every time I think about bullet charts, I literally think about that episode of Parks and Rec. Um, you can use contrasting colors to make it more readable. My example on here is actually going to use value. So I wanted to, I always include this one because I have some public libraries that are like, I'm printing this out for my board. I don't really have access to color prints or it's expensive for me. So I show that value can be used to show contrasting colors and making it more readable. And So yes, I think that's the end of where I was going with color there. This graph actually uses value instead of color. So I'm actually showing this here, and that's specifically because I get this question a lot from public libraries. And you can use value and still make it visually appealing. And you're still able to print out something for your board or whatever. And sometimes you don't have to use color. And the specific way will still make it kind of visually appealing and will show that this gauge is progressing towards an inline or goal and whether you're exceeding that goal or not. Okay, this is our last visualization that I wanted to talk about because it covers quantitative data. Um, and one thing that I would like to include in the future is talking about quantitative data with sentiment analysis because that's what I personally do now. But then again, a topic that I could talk a lot about for a long time. So I'm not going to talk about that here. We talk a little bit about word clouds for your quantitative data. Um, This is a graph that's primarily used for quantitative information, so your survey data. This is going to be stuff with text answers in the form of surveys or interviews, something that I've done as well. This chart is different from the rest because it doesn't interpret it in the same way. It kind of just gives us an idea. The goal is actually just to see a commonality between each answer and in a quick way and to show what the frequency of someone's answers are. So the two best practices for these are making sure that you use readable colors. To remove filler words is huge. This is something that I have to do often. So filler words are going to be like, and the, if you feed it through a word cloud and you don't choose those filler words, usually they automatically do this, but sometimes some of them don't. You're just going to get the as the biggest word on your word cloud. Some of the data viz community are not a fan of these because they think that it is misleading. Um, I just use them more as to get a general idea so I can see what they're saying is that maybe a word is popping up more, but it's not showing the context of the word. So we're not really sure if that's useful for us or not. I use them a lot when there's a lot of text involved, but specifically when I'm looking for not like a ton of different answers. But this is a good way to get just a very quick overview of your survey data. So this is an example that I did for this survey that I did for Wonder Media, which is a program that we have at Library of Michigan. and they specifically wanted to know who's using it and what term they use for what their title is. And overall, we see that youth services is obviously the largest portion of people and what who are using Wonder Media. And then we have teen and then adult as well. I've removed filler words from here. I do see that there is administration in here, which was surprising. Um, People who work in collections using this as well, people who work in consulting. So this is giving me a general idea, very quick with this survey. And I know that I'm not going to get a ton of different answers. So this just gives me a general overview, like, oh, okay, mostly youth services is using this program. All right, so these are my final design tips. After this, I don't think I have any questions here. This is where I was going to take halfway questions. But I'm going to do final design tips. I'm going to go over specifically choosing the best visualization, and then we're going to take a 10-minute break. So if you do have questions, then you can also put them in a few minutes when I go through the second part of this presentation as well. But I wanted to,
Let's
yes.
just pause for a moment because it's
Yeah.
possible that they've been listening so intently that they just haven't typed anything in.
Okay.
Um, yeah, do you guys have any questions about the graphs that she's gone through and all these resources? I learn so much and learn it again every time I
Yeah.
listen to Barb's talk. I
Can you talk a little more about accessibility? You briefly mentioned it, but how do you make charts accessible?
Yeah. So I actually have, after I talk about choosing the best visualization, I actually go over that a bit more. I actually link on that specific um, uh, slide, the US actually the US data strategical data, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. They actually have a list of the things that you need to do with visual when it comes to accessibility. So I will get to that um, in a little bit. I go more in depth into that. But
Great.
specifically with us and accessibility, we have to feed it through certain software. And there's certain levels of accessibility that we have to reach when it comes to that. I'm not sure what your organization does, but we have like a different category when it comes to it. So the first thing that we do is like with Power BI, it has built-in accessibility monitors. So what I do is I feed it through that accessibility thing, and then it will actually ping like, this is not readable, this color needs to be changed. Specifically, it'll give me design tips as well. So some of your software actually has built-in accessibility. The state has another level where state of Michigan, specifically where I have to feed it then through their accessibility feeder, and then it has to meet those standards. And a lot of times it's just having me um, for charts specifically. Sometimes I need to include the table data. So then when a screen reader reads through it, it will read through the table data for the person. So that's something that usually I have to include. It just depends on who, if I'm working with the state specifically, I will have to usually have a table involved with it. Another thing as well is that the colors that I use, I don't have to really think about it too much because we have brand standards in which that I follow that have been approved at the accessibility level. But some colors like yellow are very hard to read. So there are some things that I go over as well. I'll go more in depth over it. But yes, so and glad you brought this up. I went to a presentation on accessibility and data, and I was like, I need to do this one too as well for the state of Michigan, because you can go so much over it. There's so much there. So I only cover a little bit, but I would love to do an entire presentation on it because it's really important. And also at the state level, they're starting to require us to meet certain accessibility standards.
Okay, so I think what we hear is or what I see is people are listening intently,
Yeah.
which I'm not surprised by. I certainly am myself. So let me turn it back over to you.
So I want to start with well, actually, I want to do my final design tips for this section, and then we'll get into the next section, which is choosing a visualization. So I see a lot of data visualizations that don't consider how powerful like a design can be because color is really important. We often read color with certain associations. So for example, and also, like I mentioned earlier, we have brand standards that I have to follow at Library of Michigan, so I specifically have to follow those as well. And they make an association to our organization when I do that. Um, One example that I like to talk about here is color association. So tracking rising temperatures across the United States, I saw this visualization and somebody chose blue is warming and red is cooling, and these are just not associations that we make with temperature. So it may seem obvious, but I think sometimes people think, oh, this is my favorite colors. I want to choose this versus thinking, well, what does my audience see? Will will they be able to make this association? Are they seeing it backwards? So that's one of my personal advice is to think about color association and how we as a culture see it. And also coming up with a color scheme, but your organization might have brand standards. Like I have to follow brand standards whenever I make this. Some of you guys might have a bit more freedom. Um, some software like Excel, Power BI, even Canva, they will actually come up with a color scheme for you if you so you can choose as well. So if that's not something that you're interested in doing and you're like, I just want to choose something that's easy and it'll be easy to read. Some of these programs actually have built-in color schemes. So it makes it easier to make these visualizations. Make sure to stay away from text that is hard to read as well. Yellow on a white background, that's something that accessibility wise that we have to stay aware of. Um, and visualization software like Excel will usually default to not doing that stuff. So that's wonderful. A lot of those will actually have built-in design choices as well. Um, and remember when laying out our visualizations, how we read. So we read naturally left to right, and then also other cultures. I was actually in Japan a few weeks ago. They read right to left. So think about who your audience is and how we read things as well. So what visualizations do we want to start with? It's usually how we're going to read it. So if you want to tell a story with your data and you want to work them through the page, maybe start understanding like maybe this is the first visualization that I want um, on my dashboard or on my report. I don't get into size too much in our visualizations, but size like color has correlation. So we'll naturally see a larger dot as more. I briefly talk about bubble charts in here, but I don't extrapolate on them. But bubble charts are using size as a way to show more people chose this answer. So keep that in mind. That size is important as well, and use it strategically. You can use it to highlight important parts of your research as well. So now that we've discussed the many types of visualizations, let's talk about how we figure out what the best type is for your data. Oh, okay. So Kimberly was saying we need to follow accessibility standards. Yes. Yeah. Good to know. So I thought the best way to approach this idea for a while, and so I read this really great article about asking yourself questions about your data, and I kind of changed the way that I did data visualization for the past few years. So I thought I would share this with you, and it's just kind of the best way once you have your data, which one is the best one? So first question you want to ask yourself is, do you want to compare your data? So these are the charts that I use the most in my research. Maybe you will use as well. These are going to be your column charts, pie charts. I use them to compare different library cooperatives and their usage for Library Michigan services. I use column charts for this. A bar chart may be used when I am helping a library or when I worked in a public library progress towards a goal. So, for example, we did a library card drive, things like that. That's what you use a bullet chart for. Some data visualization software will actually default for you. They will default a color scheme for you, and they'll also default a chart for you. It's not always the best choice or the most visually appealing. But like, for example, Power BI was like, always use a bar chart. but I don't always think that's the best way to show my data. You don't also have to rely on the basics. There are many other choices that can fit your comparisons of your data. So other examples I have here are charts that are good for making comparisons. So scatter plots are big, pie charts, line charts. These all have strong visual markers. It makes it easy to understand and read when you're making comparisons. So the next question is, do you want to break down parts of a whole? And this is where area charts really shine. So I actually, when I wrote this presentation, I was still on Twitter. I am no longer on Twitter, but I'm going to still use the example. I saw a breakdown in usage with this data science Twitter, and they were talking about the breakdown in usage of left and right-handedness, and it was very well done. It compared the parts of the whole of the United States to the entire population, and it emphasized that over time, that as left-handedness became more accepting, more people were not demonizing it, more people became left-handed. So it was a great visualization, and it was very powerful because it showed the impact on how, as society, once we accept things, people are able to be themselves, they're able to use their left hand. Um, it just kind of depends on what's right for you. So if you're breaking down parts of a whole, this is a good place to start. So, for example, I'm breaking down parts of the whole of all the libraries in Michigan. These are the ones to use this for. The next question is the distribution of your data important? So this is the scatter plot idea with Old Faithful. So scientific measurement. So for example, a scatter plot might be the best fit for your particular data because it's easy to read and you can see a range of information, and distribution is important. So back to our Old Faithful data, the scatter plot showed us that over time, as they were measuring, the longer the eruption, the longer the wait time in between eruptions. So we were able to get this, and actually when they did their linear regression, they were able to measure this and see, yes, so a long eruption, there's a longer wait time in between. We also have line charts here, which are very simple and easy to read usually if you less is more with these. I actually saw I go hiking a lot, and on the lake shore, there actually is these sand dunes that you can climb up, and there is a line chart, an Excel line chart that's just like sitting there as you enter, and it's showing specifically the distribution of trees to beach erosion over time. So they were saying basically stay on the path, do not walk off the path because it's hurting the trees, and then the sand dunes erode. So it was a wonderful chart. It was very simple, but it was powerful, and it reminded me not to walk on the path. I mean, sorry, to walk on the path and not to walk off the path. In my current role, I'm not analyzing trends as much, although this is shifting uh, as my role progresses a little bit. When we're talking a little bit about funding things and things like that, we want to kind of look at trends of how people are using circulation in our databases. So I'm doing this a little bit more, but column charts and line charts are great for this. So for example, my coworker's son was using this to analyze a trend. Specifically, he graduated with a meteorologist degree, and he was doing research on in Oklahoma, specifically looking at tornadoes and why they're hitting certain towns more. So he's looking for trends in his data. He's trying to understand why specifically certain towns in Oklahoma get hit more than others. And they're using this to try to predict future tornadoes. So if this is something analyzing trends, like I said, I'm using this more to look at trends with circulation and also database usage. So these charts are actually a good example of those. And then the final question is, are you looking at relationships between value sets? For example, let's say you want to look at one value set such as poverty, and then you want to look at another value set such as crime, and you want to see if there's relationship. You may use a scatter plot or a line chart, use a bubble chart, which I did not include in this presentation because there's just so much already, but it allows you to look at the data and to see if there is a correlation. And I attended a virtual conference a few years ago that talked about Michigan data, and they used some of these visualizations to talk about historic redlining data and air pollution. And they used a layering technique where they pulled data, specifically redlining data that they had, and then the air pollution data that they had been collecting. And they saw that even today, historically redlined areas had more air pollution overall. So it was a great way to use a visualization and to compare data sets. And I still remember it to this day. I learned a lot from that specific presentation. Um, so it's a great, powerful way to make correlations between your data sets. So this is a question I get a lot, which is data ethics. And so I thought I'd include it briefly on this topic here, just to cover it a little bit. And I'm not, once again, this also could be an entire presentation, but I just want to cover this really quick here. So this is something you should be asking yourself when you're creating visualizations. Ethics and data are really important. Also, design, it should be a design practice. Being respectful to the community and really thinking thoroughly about the data that you're displaying and respecting privacy and acting honestly. So I've seen some visualizations that are just not honest and they're visually deceiving. For example, the Y chart not starting at 0. And I've seen specifically this used to show that violent crime had been increasing, but they had not started at 0. And then they also started at a random year versus looking for many, many years. So they were using it not honestly and they were manipulating the data. Um, Transparency is really important, especially when it comes to Library of Michigan. So basically, we want to make sure that we're transparent and we're labeling everything. And that way we're able to communicate to our stakeholders what this data is. I actually included a link below to the federal data strategy here as well. So when I share these slides, it should link to that. So if you're looking for more information on this topic, it discusses the data ethic tenets and basically I encourage everybody to read over those. It's just specifically, I actually read a book about data ethics and I included it at the end of this presentation. And she talks about how we might be trying to help a community, but we're actively harming them when we do some of our data because the way that we're presenting it. So great, this is a great read to read over the federal data strategy, but um, also the book that I have at the end of this presentation. Okay, so I'm gonna have us take a break here because I cover a lot, and then I'm gonna cover the part that I like the best, which is talking about art. So um, let's see here. We are an hour in. So let's say, how long of a break should we take?
Usually just take about 5 because it's enough time for people to sort of stand up, stretch, get a water or whatever.
Perfect. Yeah, let's take 5 minutes. Well, for me, it's 11 o'clock on the dot, but yes, let's be back in 5 minutes from now. So 10:05 for you.
And then 5 for us. All right. Thanks, Barbara. I'm just going to pause the recording.
Thanks.
Okay, hopefully everyone had a good stretch. You ready to go, Barb?
I am. I actually called the plumber in between
All right.
and they said, "Oh, we were going to help you right then." And I was like, in the middle of my presentation, of course. Of course. Okay. Well, let's get back to it. I was just like, of course, this is the timing I
Yeah,
get.
yeah. All right, I'll hit the record and let you start going again.
So this is my favorite part because I get to talk about my undergrad degree a little bit. Which is talking about the elements of design and how to make things visually appealing. So we've discussed all these visualizations. Okay, now let's talk about the art portion of it a little bit more in depth. So, and we're going to talk a little bit about some really beautiful specific data visualizations that are more kind of considered a work of art. And I'm just going to show them just because I really like them. I wouldn't say specifically for you all to use those unless, let's say, you wanted to make some sort of beautiful poster of some sort of like that. But I love showing them as examples because of what we think about data visualization can be very different in a way. And I read a great book that talked about the art of data visualization and talking about how specifically like art and art history and some of our paintings, actually, we can gather a bunch of data for them. They could be considered data visualization. So that's just specifically like um, just me and my interests. And we'll talk, but mostly I'm going to talk about elements of design here when it comes to your data. So we won't get into in depth like, oh, create a piece of art, but mostly I just like showing what other people have done. So when I give this presentation to people in marketing, I always ask how many people are familiar with the elements of design, and they all are, obviously. Um, but when I talk to people in library land, they're not as much. So basically, the elements of design are things like color, shape, and typography. And great design just doesn't happen by chance. It happens strategically by choosing color, shape, or typography, all of which have an impact on our viewer or viewers and perceives engages with our piece of work. So this is a great quote that I pull actually from Adobe talking about design and how powerful it can be for our viewers. And so this is going to be a little bit of art, but you'll see how it applies when we're talking about data visualization here. So these are the elements of design. I'm not going to talk about all of them. We don't have time, but we have typography, texture, space, line, shape, and color. I'm going to talk about typography, space, and color today because I think those are probably the most important ones. Um, Shape, maybe some of these aren't as important when it comes to data visualization, so I thought I would just focus on specific ones that I use the most and the ones that I think are most important for data visualization. Typography are your fonts, Arial, Helvetica, Times New Roman. Um, Even the ones that are a little bit more fun and not probably ones you'll use, like Comic Sans or Papyrus. Um, and then space is going to be your area around, above your visualizations. And I think this is actually the most important one because it talks about the negative area around your graph, so it makes it easier for people to read. And finally, color, which I've talked about throughout the entire presentation, but um, I consider it's just my favorite element to talk about, so I thought I would include it a little bit more here in depth and talk about how these elements can apply to your data visualizations. So this is just a very beautiful, kind of hard to read poster about the genealogy of pop and rock and how it all kind of blended together. And I found this in a book series talking about the most beautiful graphic design or data design elements, data visual elements. And I just love including it because it's just very beautiful. I don't necessarily say this would be the greatest for your data, but I would just wanted to show you how it can be used in a way. Um, so when we think about typography and fonts, we might not give it a lot of thought. We might just think, oh, is it readable? But a lot of times when we use certain fonts or typography, it's used for a certain occasion, right? For example, if you're at a wedding, I was at a wedding a few weeks ago, and they often use calligraphy for your table card, calligraphy for the invites and things like that, because it's this thing that we evoke a mood for a wedding, right? So this idea of like this is a wedding, and we just use calligraphy, this very flowing kind of typography. The same can be for your data visualizations. Now, I don't say, hey, use a typography because that might be hard to read, but think about what is important. What kind of mood are you trying to evoke with your data? What are you interested in conveying here? I have to follow brand standards. So for me, I don't have a lot of choice when it comes to typography. I actually have to choose this, but it evokes the mood of my library, right? Because they associate this typography with my library. So you want to think about you, your data, and your stakeholder. What kind of impression are you trying to convey to them? What kind of mood are you trying to give them? What instant impressions? Because typography will give an instant impression. Um, you'll also want to make sure that visual hierarchy is important here. So, for example, in this one, they obviously use the title higher, and it's larger than the rest of it as well, because this is something they want people to know what it is. Example, so using visual hierarchy in typography is important. Um, so making a very small title might not be the way to go because people aren't sure what it is. And it might just seem obvious because most charts are just built that way already, but sometimes people kind of go off book and try to make it, oh, I want to make my title really small because need to fit it somewhere, but you want to use this to your advantage. You want it because it's more readable and people are going to give an impression and it's going to create a focal point, which is interesting to talk about with data visualization, but you can create focal points with typography and color, and that leads people's eye to the data that you want them to look at. So the second thing here I'm going to talk about is space, and I think this is actually the most important because this refers to the positive and negative space around your data visualizations. So a lot of these come pre-built in, but some of them don't. And basically, space allows our eye to breathe and it creates less visual competition. So it allows us to simplify and not overwhelm the viewer. It groups elements together because we see white as a separator. So for example, in my example here of this dashboard, they have actually layered their data on top of each other and categorized it into orders, sales, average check, and then they've separated it with white space so we understand that this area, this box, this white space around it is separating orders from sales. So the reason I include this is that I see a lot of data visualizations where they just cram as much data as possible, but you need the eye to breathe. It's just going to overwhelm your viewer. They're going to have a hard time reading it. They may give up because it's just too hard. I always use an example. Actually, I was listening to 99% Invisible and they talked about GeoCities. And I like to use this as an example because the old internet in the 90s and the aughts was just the wild west of graphic design. There's a lot of built-in design now for websites that makes it easier for us to read. But back in the day, like people would have their MySpace and they would have like a flashing, yes, yeah, flashing like glowing letters, and it was really hard to read. Eye-catching, but not readable, and also not accessible as well. Doesn't follow accessibility standards. But the idea that we had to fill the page with every single bit of information that we possibly can is just not the way to do things. It's going to be just very hard to read. And you don't want to exhaust your viewer. You want them to look at this data visualization, get an idea what you're trying to say very quickly, and not be like, I have to give up. I can't even read this. So this dashboard does a great job with this. Using separation, they even use boxes, but they don't use a hard line for a box, so it's not as like stopping our eye as much. It allows us to flow a little bit more through the dashboard. And Also, they layer their data, so they're not just putting it all side by side. Layering it is a way to make it easier for us to read, and we can click on things versus just having it all in one box and trying to read so much data at once. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is color. So I love talking about color a lot because it was one of my favorite things to do when I was in art school and specialize in using color and mixing color and color matching. Um, and it's basically the reason I wrote this presentation was specifically that example that I used about the heating and cooling of the United States, and it was climate data, and they used red as cooling and blue as warming. And I was like, I need to make a presentation explaining to people using data visualizations that that is not a good idea. It's very hard to read. So I specifically made this whole presentation around the idea of like color associations and things like that. And I delved more into learning design practices for each specific data visualization as well, when there's just so much more you can do to make it easier for your viewer. Um, it's a very important design element. You can also use value if that's not available to you as well. I have some libraries that have to use value. But in marketing, when I've talked to people who are in marketing as well, because I've also done presentations for them, they talk about branding and brand colors because this evokes a mood. It psychologically connects us to our brand. So for us, we have a brand standard at Library of Michigan. Sometimes like the state entity, like state of Michigan has brand standards that we also have to follow within our own umbrella. And it's supposed to psychologically connect us to that specific group. Some of you might not have that, but you can use this to your advantage. So you can specifically use color associations, like warm colors are considered more exciting and cool colors are considered more peaceful. So example, maybe you're measuring something that would you be considered like how people spend their free time. You might want to do something that's peaceful or something you want to have that color association. So you can use color associations to your advantage there to kind of make associations with your stakeholder or your viewer when they first look at it. Um, it can help maximize your design as well. And creating a color palette is also something that I recommend. Now, for many of you, you're like, I don't understand this idea of color palette. A lot of the softwares have it built in. So they have these built-in software that will actually have these color palettes available for you. But if you want to know more for yourself, I would encourage you to look up like the idea of the color palette and um, between, primary, secondary, tertiary colors and how they all interact with each other. Because you have contrasting colors like red and green that are going to create more dynamics versus colors that aren't like blue and green, which are more harmonious, right? So we can actually use these color associations to our advantage. Like with climate data, we can use blue and red association. We can use green and red associations for profit, loss, and gain. We can use those associations and they create very quick impressions. And these are all very just, what's the word I'm looking for? They are instant and basically when people make these associations, they do it without thinking. So this is how we can use this in our data visualizations. And I actually showed this chart here. This also comes from there was a design competition and they were specifically trying to create beautiful designs with a lot of data and they were trying to show how it's done. And this is kind of like an area chart, column chart that they do. And they are specifically looking at creative work between these really famous artists. These are writers, artists, performers. And when they do their creative work, when they sleep, when they're at their job, if they have a job, do they exercise? Or is there another thing going on? And so this person won this competition, and it's basically, gosh, it was a competition. Like you have a lot of data, try to make it visually appealing. And I really liked this one as well. Very easy to read. The colors are a little bit more subtle as well, so they're not using brighter colors. Um, they're using a lower, what we call a hue. Basically, like this is a blue, but it's like if you added white to it, it's not as bright. It's not right out of the tube color. So they're trying to use this because if these were all very bright, it would be hard to read, right? So they're using these more desaturated colors. And then this is the part where I talk about accessibility as well. So a good place to start is accessibilitydigital.gov. I could not remember off the top of my head, even though I've given this presentation so many times and I've been there so many times. When you're on the spot, sometimes you just cannot remember. Some of this is just like retreads of the best design practices that I covered, because a lot of them actually follow accessibility standards because we're trying to make things more readable. But a good practice is what I covered in the question is to include a graph or a brief description. So sometimes a brief description, the screen reader will read that as well, and then that will give the person who is using the screen reader an idea of what they're looking at. So that was something actually that is required for some of my visualizations. It just depends on where it is on the website. This is sufficient contrast between colors, considering a graph, including a brief description. And then a lot of those best visualization practices are just built into accessibility. So the contrast between colors is super important. Like yellow on a white background is just not readable. So a lot of those things that I talked about actually fit accessibility standards. But if you want to know more, I'm going to share these slides. You can click on the link as well. And it can give you more of what the federal level, what they do for accessibility with data visualization. This is going to be my final segment, and we're going to talk about data visualization software. And this is the part where I considered adding AI in because I'm seeing it more and more. I actually this winter went to Microsoft in AI, and they specifically reached out to me because they wanted to show their new data visualization stuff they can do with AI. And I'm a librarian, so I have a hard time trusting AI in a way because sometimes it's it's a language learning model. So if it doesn't answer the question, it's just going to fill in information. And as a data analyst and a librarian, I don't really want it to make up information. So I had a hard time trusting it. And I did go to um, I did go to their AI meetup, and the stuff that it could do was crazy. You could feed the AI, basically your Excel spreadsheet, your data into it, and it could pop out all these visualizations. And then I asked, how accurate is it? And they go, well, sometimes it's inaccurate. And I go, I can't use this then. Um, so there is that idea with AI. It can make visualizations instantly, but you just have to be aware that sometimes it will make up stuff when it can't answer the question because it is a language learning model. So I'm sure it's getting better and better. This was this winter. It might even be better from then. It's been almost 6 months, so who knows where it's at its journey. But I have used it to clean my data as long as it has no personal information on it, like emails or birthdays, or I've done it for or like anything, birthday, name, any of that. Don't feed that into AI at all. I specifically asked survey questions and none of them had their name in it. So I wanted it to clean the survey data and I wanted it to help me do a sentiment analysis because you need a level of coding to do a sentiment analysis. And so, was it accurate? I would say I had my doubts on it, so I ran it a couple times, but AI is interesting and is making a lot of breakthroughs in data visualization. So I'm not sure where we're even going to be in a year at this point with that. But I want to talk about data visualization software and not AI. I just wanted to include that because I'm seeing that more and more. And some of my hangups with it is just, like I said, sometimes it makes up information. So you probably have heard of Excel. So you can definitely make visualizations in Excel. I've seen it all the time. I actually included some of them, what they look like. I also included Looker Studio. It actually used to be called Google Data Studio. And this is just something that Google has. So it's kind of their version of data visualization software. So if, let's say, your company or your library uses Google versus Microsoft, Looker Studio is included. It is free. Even if you have a Gmail account, it is included. And it links to Google Sheets. So specifically if you're using Google Sheets. And for people who don't have a lot of experience with data analytics or data visualization, honestly, I always recommend kind of starting with Excel, something you're familiar with, or even if you're Google Sheets, starting with the basics. And like I said, I saw that line chart when I was hiking on the sand dunes, and it was just in Excel, and it explained clearly to me that I need to not walk on sand dunes because they will erode, and then the trees won't have a way to grip them, and it's keeping the trees from growing. So specifically, that was Excel. Um, Google Data Studio is a bit more advanced than Excel, so it's going to have more of a shareable dashboard. It's going to have more of that reactiveness that you'll see on some of the dashboards that you see online. I can use Looker Studio for my web-based analytics. I use that sometimes for that as well because I have to track the analytics of or the usage of certain websites. So that's something that I can use it for. It seems simple to use. It has some elements to it that are a little bit more advanced that I could see from Power BI, but it's like an in-between, I would say, between Excel and Looker Studio. And then a few years ago, I actually attended a conference specifically that was research in public libraries, and they have librarians that just don't have access to anything. And they suggested when they're doing their data collection that Canva, you can make it in Canva, which I included in here. And they even said PowerPoint because they were like, I have some librarians that are scared of Excel. So I was like, they were like, PowerPoint was the way to go. And that ranged, they had talked about the range of items that people have used to make data analytics, even like Photoshop, especially when it comes to map data, things of that nature. So there's all sorts of things that people use for it. Um, but Canva was easy to use, pop in. So if you have access to Canva, some offices do. But specifically, I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about Excel and Looker Studio, and then some of the more advanced options. So this is kind of what an Excel spreadsheet looks like, or sorry, not a spreadsheet, Excel chart looks like. Um, And I actually included some other ones as well. They have a lot of basics to them. You can actually change it up and have a dark background with white lettering. And there's definitely nothing wrong with using the basics because, like I said, when it comes to data analytics, it's building on your knowledge. So once you get comfortable with one thing and you feel like you want to use something that might be a little harder or something that's just not meeting your needs, you have that base knowledge from Excel to understand how it works. So when you move to maybe Looker Studio or Power BI or Tableau, you have that knowledge. So there's nothing wrong with starting with Excel. Excel is great for a lot of things, especially when when you are familiar with Excel, but you're not as familiar with Google Analytics or data analytics. So Looker Studio, which used to be Google Data Studio, is a lot more simple than Power BI and Tableau. And it actually imports your data from Google Sheets, which is nice. And for me, I actually do Google Analytics specifically for certain websites for Library of Michigan. And so I can actually import that data directly, and because I need to report that data. So specifically, I can do that. You can use SQL with it as well. So people have used that as well. Some offices or some libraries have like used the Google Suite. So this is why I always include this one. I'm like, this is free. And it is free if you have a Gmail account. So you don't even need to have like the Google Suite to get access to this. So it is free. So I specifically use Power BI. This is what is required with me with the state of Michigan. But in the past, I've used Tableau, especially when I was in grad school at University of Washington. That's actually what I learned there when I took data analytics and that sort of thing. Um, Tableau is expensive. So that's why that specifically I don't have access to it at the state. I can pretty much do everything on, I like Tableau because it's more intuitive, but Power BI can pretty much do everything that Tableau does. So it hasn't really been that difficult. I had to relearn it because it was completely different software. But I even took a class on Power BI when I first started because it was so different from Tableau. And I had to learn the ins and outs. I'm still learning stuff with Power BI daily. There are things because it is advanced software, but it really helps for what I need to do because I need to embed it on websites. And I actually have it connected to my Excel spreadsheet. So what I do is if I basically we have data once a month that comes in for me for databases, right? What libraries are using what databases. And I input that in monthly and then it connects to my Excel spreadsheet, which then sends it to all of the reports and dashboards I have embedded around the internet so that the general public can see when what is being used or often libraries are asking me who's using what. So we actually have it that it's all interactive and I don't have to go into Power BI and make any changes. I just go into Excel and fill it out. So Power BI has that power where it's an app, a web-based portal, and it just talks to all the other Microsoft products. There's a lot of ins and outs that I learned from it specifically, but yes. So Tableau and Power BI are very similar. If I had to choose, I would probably choose Tableau, but Tableau is more expensive. So, all right, so I'm going to wrap up my presentation here and then we have time for questions. I actually turned off the chat. Let me click this here, see what my chat has up. Um, all right, so there are 4 big main tips that I want from this presentation. So first is good design is important and powerful. So when I think about all the visualizations that I've encountered over the years, it's surprising to see how much I remember from them. So for example, the left and right-handedness one, the one that was talking about air pollution and redlining data. So I love good design and overall being considerate of this can make you look more professional. And also there's accessibility to that as well. It can make it more appealing for your reader. And so one of the worst designs I saw over the years was somebody who was using a map of housing data and they wanted to talk about how much it had risen over the years and how much housing is costing. And it used dark green for lower prices and light blue for higher prices. And that was just like making something darker and lighter. Just the correlation was hard for me to read. I also couldn't read any of the labels. So it was just really hard to read that map data. But it prevents extra work for your viewer if you have good design and it doesn't frustrate you and it doesn't think, why did somebody do this way? I can't read this. What are they trying to tell me? I track database usage for my colleagues. So when I create good design, I think about the wording I'm using for my colleagues versus the wording I'm using for the general public. I might say to my colleagues, oh, they are, for example, the circulation of this or the usage versus a search. General public doesn't understand those terms, so I use that for my colleagues, but then I use different wording for the general public. Actually, I have to take training on this called plain language training. So when I do stuff for the general public, it has to be in plain language. So that's actually an accessibility thing. Plus, it's also a good design because it depends on who you're talking to. Think back to Florence Nightingale and who she had to talk to, the general public versus medical professionals. Asking yourself about questions about your data is important, and this is something I recently discovered and have incorporated into my own work. So it made me slow down and be more considerate about what I am doing with my visualizations. So this is one of my favorite parts of it, and I love to include asking yourself questions. And then my last tip is just start simple. And there's nothing wrong with using Excel, but there's also, you might want to get more advanced eventually, and that's fine too. You can get more and more advanced up to coding languages as well when it comes to data visualization. Sky's the limit on that. So that is, but I'm just saying, starting at the beginning, and you can kind of get your point across and also make it accessible and visually appealing. So that is my tips for looking at the design overall of all of our specific visualizations, and then also looking at a dashboard as a whole and how they all correlate and what kind of story are we telling with our data. So thank you all. That is the end of my presentation. It's a long one. We have time for questions here, and I'm going to see if I can pull up. Thank you. I'm not seeing the chat.
So
Oh, there
great.
we go.
There we go. Okay. So yeah, everyone, any questions overall? I have one to get us started.
Hmm.
Barb, do you ever just sort of try out, say, three different charts and sort of just even like look at them yourselves? But do you ever like ask other people, like, hey, like if I did this way, like, do you ever do any sort of, I'm going to call it user testing on your visualizations?
Yeah. So I do that a lot, specifically with my coworkers. Before it goes live to everyone. So there's two aspects of my job, which is like giving data to the general public and then giving data to libraries out in the community and then my colleagues. And so usually it goes through my boss and it goes through some people that I ask to look at my visualizations. Um, and sometimes I include infographics with the visualizations to try to make it even more visually appealing as well. And then so they kind of analyze it and say, I can't read this. I don't like this design choice. And so even me who has experience with understanding that sort of thing, um, it's always good to have someone else look at it specifically because have you ever seen this woman who she looks at bad logos and she's like, what were they thinking? Well, that's because they didn't run it by anybody.
Yeah.
So it's always good for people to look at it and be like, I can't read this. Or they're like, this kind of looks funny to me. So it's
Hmm.
always great to ask. And yeah, my manager and other people that I work with will look at it.
Hmm. Great. I think that's one thing I try and emphasize a lot is that like as somebody on the inside, we often like it looks so obvious to us when we look at it. And then
Yeah.
somebody else is like, I don't understand the point of this. So all
Yeah.
right, Kevin. Yeah, jump in here.
Yeah, I had a quick thought, and just is in terms of like the formats in which academic librarians usually use charts or data. And
Hmm.
there's generally like three different kind of ways that I see, which is academic articles, um, posters, or present slide decks or presentations. I wonder if you
Hmm.
had any thoughts about sort of the appropriateness of the three different formats for different kinds of charts or things that go well.
Yeah. So that's all on your audience, right? So that I have seen so many different ways in the academic community, especially when I was in grad school. And it just kind of depended on who you're specifically trying to reach. Um, and specifically if the lingo and the understanding of what they're trying to say. So like if I'm asking my colleagues, I might make it, maybe the design doesn't have to be as nice because I need to include more information, but I also can include terms and other things like that. Like talking about circulation data, something that the general public doesn't probably understand a little bit, or talking about usage data and databases and stuff like that. So I kind of make my design or make that choice between how I want to show my data based on who my audience is in general. So from an academic standpoint, it's interesting because you have a lot of people that might be looking at this, right? And so when I did a specific research, uh, talking about summer reading in public libraries when I was at University of Washington, and right, I had to present and write a report, and then I included a lot of data visualizations on there a for my professors, but then I had to go present it in a hall, and then I had to talk about it. So from there, I made it as visually appealing as possible. Like a huge poster I had to make. And I tried to make it eye-catching, and I noticed like a lot of people around me were making it very like academic oriented. I ended up getting contacted because they were like, "We really like that you used specifically making it easier for us to read. You're in this hall trying to present." Especially if you go to like a conference, you do one of those poster presentations, which I've done before. People are walking by. The more visually appealing it is, the more likely they're going to come over to you. So it just kind of depends on where you're at, where your audience is. Um, Obviously, when I'm doing my research on summer reading in libraries, I'm specifically looking at the summer slide and how that impacts libraries. I'm writing a research paper or I'm writing for my professor and creating a dashboard. It just depends on what I'm doing and and who I'm making it for.
Any other questions for Barb?
I want to check out this Space Jam thing.
Kimberly is always good for the,
Oh, it's on my
yeah,
presentation.
that's
Oh my
okay.
gosh.
That's okay.
Wow. This is crazy. I feel like I've seen this before. I feel like I'm a 90s kid, so I've this is like unlocked a part of my brain
Yes.
that I forgot about. Thank you for sharing.
All right. Well, Barb, I want to thank you so much. As usual, this has just been so highly informative. And Barb is serious when she says that she's happy to have you get in touch with her if you have any follow-up questions or the like. We'll be posting the recording within the Canvas site. But I always learn a lot, and I still am forever grateful for the universe putting us next to each other in line at a
Yeah.
at a
Yeah.
conference where I was like, oh, we're doing the like, what do you do? What do you do? And I was like, you are the person we need. So she has graciously been part of our program ever since. And I think really adds a lot to our discussion, including just like such a good example of practicing what she's preaching with her great design. And I also think we know that you have a degree in this that obviously gives you a leg up, but at the same time, I feel like you've really told us some ways that we can take the learnings that one has and like use some of the tools that are now available on the market, some of them for free, some of them provided by our institutions that can really sort of take us up a level with our presentations. And that's really useful and helpful. So again, thank you very much, Barb. I'll go ahead and stop the recording. And then as usual, if we have any last minute questions that people didn't want to have on the recording, we'll hang out a little bit and stop. So let me stop the recording.
Yeah. So as well, my job is answering questions like this. So yes,
I
more
know
than
you're doing
happy
the
to answer.
librarian thing. It's my job.
It's my job. I put my references up here and then future reading, and these are Beautiful Evidence is wonderful book.
Mhm.
And it talks about data visualizations in fine art. So just one of my favorites. And then
Mhm.
some of these books are just great when it comes to like functional art and
Mhm.
storytelling and data and things like that. I don't cover storytelling as much, but in a way, good design is storytelling. So,
Great. We had storytelling last month with Kate McDowell from
oh,
here at
great.
Illinois, you've probably seen some of the work she's doing on data storytelling, the
Yeah.
project. So you guys are kind of like a 1-2 punch together.
That's great. I love to hear that. Yeah, I love that. I always think about that when I'm doing this because I'm like design and storytelling are very interlinked in a lot of ways because you're telling a story with things and then there's associations with design. So,
Yeah. Yeah. If I can get you to go back to the last slide, just in case anyone wants to take down your email address. Oops.
oh, right here.
Yeah. So if you are looking to get in touch with Barb, of course, we have her email address as well, but just wanted to make sure you have it up here. Otherwise, I think we will call this to a close. Another round of thank you again, Barb. It's just always so valuable. So,
Thank you. I always love doing this presentation. So thanks for inviting me.
yep. And everyone, we'll see you in October at the CARLI annual meeting. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yep. Let me just. Okay. So that was great, as usual, not surprising. So I don't, this group is so like chill. It's almost unnerving. My class
Yes, they're
teacher
very quiet.
is the same way. They're like,
That's interesting.
okay, okay. I'm always like, do we not have any questions or anything?
So
So
they do the work and they go with the flow, I guess.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so Anne's gone right now for a while, right?
Yes, I think she's back next week or the
Okay.
fall. Let me see what
Yeah.
her away message had said. Yes.
Okay. So do you need anything else for C calls from me right now?
I guess I'm not sure whether we'll need to soon send out the, hey, if you're
Mhm.
coming to this, please fill out our form and do the
Right.
propose to get the scholarship. I kind of feel like Anne should think like I know that I'm technically in charge now,
Yeah, I
but
know.
I'm technically in charge, but I don't feel like energetically in charge fully since
Completely,
coming in with
completely
it.
on top of things.
And it's also just like, yeah, because you and she have done this together for so long. It's like I'm coming in as like the dust broom to just get things over the line, like
Yeah.
the last pusher in the curling match. Um, so it is
So,
the deciding like in the wording, like, so getting things announced and getting things set. But when I also look at the iColc website, I
mhm,
don't actually see any details about the event at all yet. Like I don't
mhm,
see an agenda posted. So that
mhm.
also makes it kind of complicated. But yeah, and then just the deciding too of, because I think in some conversation we mentioned that we didn't think there would be a phase next of C calls. We were going to try to wrap everything all up
Right.
with this one, and then also put in a program plan change or whatever the right phrase is to say like
Right.
we're trying to sunset it with this versus bring
I
up
don't, I
another
don't think
part
we can say
two.
that we're trying to, I don't think we need to tell them we're trying to sunset it because
Yeah.
especially since IMLS is now being funded, like it would be really kind of like contrary to what we like
Hmm.
because a program like a re-budget request has to be consistent with what you proposed originally.
Yeah, and we did a planning instead of a forum.
Right.
So
So
we
it's a planning grant. So we have to still frame it as planning. I think just in our
mhm,
own minds, we have to recognize that we might be I mean, we'll know by the time we get to March if IMLS
mhm.
is going to put out another call for proposals.
Gotcha. So we'll know
So
if there's
that's
even
why
a
I'm just
chance
trying to
by
like
okay, so you're like hedging bets for what might happen in the
right.
future,
Like
but
I'm
we don't
stepping
know.
back from saying we will apply for a grant just so
Yeah.
that but I'm keeping the language of like next steps because it is a
Hmm.
planning grant. So like we have to be saying we're planning for next steps. Now,
Hmm.
next steps might be as limited as every person who participates is going to take it back and share it with their people.
Hmm.
Like that might be it.
Right. That may be what comes out of it. Because if there
Right.
is not a next grant phase, then that is where it ends with that.
Well, unless, I mean, as I said, unless there's the possibility that